After John Wayne's death in 1979, his sprawling waterfront home in Newport Beach, California, remained a symbol of quiet, masculine grandeur. Tucked in the exclusive enclave of Bay Shores, the property sat just off the harbor, its private dock still intact, a reminder of Wayne's fondness for boats and open sea. For years, the house changed hands through discreet sales, often to quiet millionaires who didn't stay long. By 2022, the property was owned by a couple from Denver, Greg and Lena Morrison, both in their mid-40s, newly wealthy from selling a chain of organic pet food stores. They were suburbanites turned coastal dreamers, charmed by the Wayne legacy, drawn to the understated elegance of the home, not knowing what they were stepping into. The house had been updated, of course. New insulation, new flooring, smart lighting, but much of the original architecture remained. Thick beams in the ceiling, low-slung fireplaces, a wood-paneled study that still smelled faintly of pipe smoke, even after decades. It was Lena who first felt the unease, before they'd even finished unpacking. "There's something about this room," she said one night while standing in the study. "I feel like someone's still here." Greg brushed it off as nerves, but he couldn't deny the heavy feeling that seemed to settle every night around the same hour just after 11. When the bay went silent and the house creaked in the dark like an old boat drifting out of time. They had been living there for 3 months when things began to shift. It started with the photographs. Greg had decorated the hallway with framed prints from old westerns, a tribute to the home's original owner. But one morning, Lena noticed that a still from the Searchers had fallen off the wall. Not crashed, not broken, just lying face up on the hardwood, as if someone had gently placed it there. Later that week, the thermostat in the study began resetting itself every night at 55 degrees, the exact temperature Wayne was said to have liked during winter evenings when he'd sit by the fire and read his scripts. Then came the footsteps. They didn't sound like creaks or shifting wood. They sounded deliberate, heavy, measured, like boots. They always came from the hallway leading to the dock, where Wayne used to keep his boat, the Wild Goose. The Morrisons didn't own a boat, and the dock had remained untouched. Lena began waking at 3:14 a.m. every night. No noise, no alarm, just a sensation, a weight pressing on her chest. One night she swore she heard a man whisper, "Get up!" She turned on the lights, searched the room. Greg was asleep. The dog was asleep. No one else was there. The next morning, Greg admitted something. "I saw him," he said, "out by the dock." Lena stared at him. "I thought it was a neighbor at first, but it was too early. Just this shape, tall, shoulders like a statue. And then it was gone." Everything seemed to revolve around that study. Lena avoided it entirely by spring. The wood-paneled walls felt too dark, too dense. She began to suspect there was something beneath the floorboards. One afternoon, while Greg was away, she pulled back the old rug, expecting maybe a crawlspace door. There was nothing except a strange discoloration in the wood, almost like something had soaked into it long ago. In the light, it looked like a shape, pair of boot prints. That night, the dog refused to enter the study, stood at the threshold whining. Then it urinated on the floor, something it had never done before. Greg, ever the skeptic, decided to spend a night in the room with a motion camera. He fell asleep around 12:30 a.m. in the leather chair near the hearth. At 3:16 a.m., the camera recorded a glitch, 2 seconds of static followed by a low scraping sound. Greg jolted awake in the footage, then looked straight into the lens, disoriented. Later, watching the footage, he would swear, "I didn't do that. I didn't look at the camera. I don't even remember waking up." They left the study locked after that. Lena called a local historian from the Newport Beach Historical Society. She expected trivia. Instead, she was told something strange. "John Wayne loved that house," the man said. "Wouldn't let anyone smoke cigars in the study but him. Kept the curtains drawn during the day. Said the light bothered his thoughts." "Did he die there?" Lena asked. "No, at UCLA. But he spent his last good months there. Especially after his surgery. He'd sit by the fire and think. He always said, 'A man needs a place to keep his ghosts.'" The words lodged in Lena's mind. A place to keep his ghosts. That night, Greg dreamed of fire. Not flames' warmth. A hearth burning low. A man sitting across from him, broad-shouldered and silent. He couldn't see his face, only the outline, the presence. And the voice, deep, tired, firm. "You don't belong here." By summer, the Morrisons had stopped inviting friends over. The air in the house felt heavy. Even their phones started to malfunction inside, signal dropping, screens freezing when taking pictures in the study. One photo Greg took, meant to capture the sunset through the study window, instead showed a figure reflected in the glass, standing behind him. They moved out in August quietly with no fanfare. The real estate agent didn't ask many questions. The house sold again in less than 6 months to a private developer who allegedly plans to remodel. The Morrisons now live in Colorado. They don't talk about the house much. But in interviews, when asked about the strangest thing that happened, Lena always gives the same answer. Sometimes a man's soul isn't ready to leave a place. And sometimes the place isn't ready to let him go. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story. The man who bought the house after the Morrisons wasn't sentimental. Alan Sutter, 59, had been a developer most of his life, not the flashy kind with yachts and neon teeth, but a low-profile operator who made his fortune restoring old properties in coastal California, flipping them for double what he paid. He was known for discretion, clean lines, big money, no drama. Alan had no particular reverence for John Wayne. He thought of the actor the way he thought of any faded celebrity, a brand, a memory, something that used to mean something. But he saw potential in the house. The bones were solid. The location, unbeatable. Tear down the study, expand the glass. Open concept everything. Rent it as a luxury vacation property. He bought the place sight unseen, flew in from Santa Barbara, and spent one evening walking through with his assistant, Brandy. She took notes. He gestured and pointed and barely looked at the ceilings. "Get rid of this," he said, tapping the wood paneling in the study with a silver pen. "Makes the whole house feel like a whiskey commercial." Brandy didn't answer. She was staring at the chair near the fireplace. Something about it made her uneasy, not the design, not the wear, but the feeling that someone had just been sitting in it. The cushion looked freshly indented. The headrest subtly leaned back, as if it still held the weight of a man. Alan noticed her silence. "It's just furniture," he said. "Hell, donate it." But that night, as the sun dropped below the Newport Marina and the lights in the bay shimmered on the water like spilled coins, Alan chose to sleep in the house. He didn't believe in ghosts, and he didn't like hotels. He took the guest room. It was quiet, too quiet. There was something peculiar about the way the walls seemed to hum, a vibration you couldn't hear, only feel. Not quite electrical, not quite natural. The house breathed differently after dark. Alan tried to sleep, but his dreams were sharp, intrusive. Disconnected images. A black hat on a coat hook. Spurs on hardwood. A glass of bourbon sweating in a trembling hand. He heard his own voice in the dream saying something he didn't remember thinking. He never left. At 2:41 a.m., he woke suddenly. No sound, just cold. He sat up, confused. The thermostat had been set to 68. The air felt like winter inside a barn. He walked barefoot into the hall, shivering, arms crossed over his chest. The lights were dim, motion-activated. As he passed the study, the door creaked open slowly, like it had been waiting for him. The room was dark, but the fireplace glowed. Just a low ember, not lit, not gas, not real, but glowing faint and red and pulsing, as if the bricks themselves had remembered the flame. Alan didn't step inside. He stood there watching, trying to understand. The leather chair was empty, but it felt inhabited. He whispered, not meaning to, "Is someone here?" No answer. But in the silence, something stirred, a pressure against the back of his neck. A slight push of air, as if someone large had just stepped behind him. He turned quickly. No one. And yet, from the far side of the house, down by the dock, he heard it. A clang. Metal on wood. Like the sound of a cleat catching a boat line. Followed by slow, booted footsteps on the planks outside. Alan didn't move. Not for a long time. By morning, the house looked normal again. Brandy arrived with coffee, cheerful and tired. Alan didn't mention the night. He didn't believe in ghosts. But he told her, casually, to delay the remodel. Said something about permits, about waiting to get the city involved. He wanted time to study the architecture. Over the next week, he kept coming back to the house. Alone. Sometimes during the day. Often at night. He'd sit in the study for hours, not touching the chair, just watching it. The hum in the walls was stronger in that room, like a distant engine, slow and rhythmic. Sometimes it would fade. Sometimes it would pulse like a heartbeat. One night he brought an old Western vinyl from the 60s, the kind Wayne might have listened to. He placed it on the turntable that had been left behind by the Morrisons. A small portable unit with a red felt pad. The needle dropped. The music played. But after 30 seconds, the record skipped and then reversed. Slowly, like it was being pulled backward. Alan stared at it. The turntable wasn't wired for that. Then the lights flickered, and he smelled it. Pipe smoke. Not artificial. Not lingering. Fresh. He stood up, heart racing, staring into the dark window glass. He saw his own reflection, and just behind his left shoulder briefly the outline of a man. Broad-shouldered, wearing what looked like a cavalry coat. The image vanished before he could turn. Alan has since stopped sleeping at the house. He stays nearby at the Lido House Hotel. He visits the property every few days, claiming he's still assessing the layout. But no one sees him inside. Brandy noticed he now wears a Stetson hat. He's grown more private, more withdrawn. And last week, a neighbor, an older man named Sal who'd lived on the same street since the 1970s, saw Alan out by the dock just after 3 a.m. He was talking to someone. Sal called out a greeting. Alan didn't answer. He just stood there, facing the water, nodding occasionally as if someone unseen was giving him instructions. When Sal mentioned it later, Alan looked confused. Said he hadn't been there at all. But there were footprints on the dock the next morning. 2 sets. One of them barefoot. The other, unmistakably boots. The Bayshore's neighborhood was never the kind of place where people asked questions. There was old money here, and with it came the kind of discreet silence that wealth fosters, a respect for privacy, and an unspoken agreement not to disturb the peace. But whispers began to move through the community like sea fog rolling in over the harbor. It started with the workers. Alan had brought in a small team of independent contractors, men he'd worked with before on high-end renovations. Quiet, professional, expensive. They arrived one Monday morning in a white van, tools in hand, ready to begin the first phase, dismantling the study. But by noon they were gone. All of them. No explanation. Brandy, who had been off-site for a meeting, found the site abandoned when she returned at 1:30. The front door was unlocked. The equipment was still in place. Coffee cups sat on the kitchen counter half full. One hard hat rested upside down on the bottom step of the staircase, as if it had been dropped in a hurry. She tried calling the crew foreman, a man named Luis Ramos, but he didn't pick up. At 4 p.m., Luis texted a single line. "We don't go back. Something's wrong in there." When pressed, he wouldn't say more. That night, Alan sat alone in the house, in the kitchen, drinking scotch straight from the bottle. The lights were off. He'd stopped using them altogether. Said the electricity had been interfering. Instead, he used candles, dozens of them arranged carefully throughout the study and the main hallway. They flickered wildly in the still air, as if disturbed by unseen movement. The wood-paneled walls no longer felt like decor. They felt like something older, something more permanent than the structure around them. Alan had begun to believe that the study had been built not for John Wayne, but by him, shaped around some private need, some unspoken hunger. A refuge, a chapel, a place to collect thoughts too heavy for daylight. He'd pulled the rug back again. The faint imprint of the boots was still there. More visible now, more defined. They hadn't faded. If anything, they were darker, as if something had come back to stand in them. Brandy returned the following morning with a structural engineer and a local preservation consultant, trying to salvage the project. The consultant, A thin, tired-looking man named Arlo Mendel took one step into the study, stopped, and quietly said, "We should not be in this room." He said it without fear, more like a doctor delivering a diagnosis. When Brandy asked what he meant, Arlo only shook his head and said, "I don't know what this is, but it doesn't want to be disturbed." She laughed nervously, expecting him to add a line about haunted houses or local legends. But he didn't. He left within 15 minutes without charging for his time. That same day, Alan began sleeping in the study. He moved a cot in, put his phone in a drawer, and stopped answering messages. Brandy, deeply uneasy, returned to Santa Barbara and stayed there. She told herself it was temporary, but part of her knew she wouldn't go back. Night, Alan wrote. Not emails, not documents, not even on paper. He wrote directly onto the wall's short, fragmented lines in pencil and chalk. Sentences that didn't make sense out of context. The horse is saddled. Don't turn your back to the flame. He keeps his oath. You brought the noise. Now you get the silence. The Duke waits. The last one appeared 3 times, in different corners of the room. Once on the ceiling. A neighbor, a young woman named Nina Delgado, who lived 2 doors down, began keeping notes of what she saw. She wasn't superstitious, but she had grown up in a Mexican household where stories of spirits were taken seriously. She didn't fear the dead, but she feared people who stopped behaving like themselves. From her second-floor window, she had a partial view of the Wayne house. She saw Alan many nights, moving through the rooms slowly, candle in hand, like a caretaker patrolling an empty museum. On April 8th at 3:12 a.m., she saw him out by the dock again. This time he wasn't alone. There was a second figure. Not fully formed, just an outline. A blur where a man should be. Wide stance. Shoulders like a door frame. A hat tilted slightly forward. The shape of someone who belonged on a horse. The 2 figures stood side by side for nearly 10 minutes. They didn't speak. Didn't move. Just stared out at the dark water. Nina's camera refused to focus. Every image she captured came back black. Or worse. Blurred, with static streaks and strange patterns of light in the lower right corner. Almost like a burn mark pressed into the digital file. Inside, the study began to change. The smell of pipe smoke became constant. The air grew thick, stale, like the inside of an old trunk sealed for decades. The shadows on the walls no longer corresponded with objects in the room. Sometimes Alan would light a candle and 3 shadows would stretch behind it. Other times, none. And then, there was the sound. Not every night, but often. Just after 3 a.m. A slow, steady click. Both heels on the floor. Crossing the hallway. Entering the room. Sometimes stopping behind the chair. Other times walking straight through the wall behind the fireplace. Alan no longer seemed surprised. He spoke aloud now, sometimes answering questions that no one else could hear. He'd begun calling the presence Mr. Morrison. But when Brandy finally reached him by phone after weeks of silence, he said something else. He whispered, voice low and hoarse, like someone who hadn't used it in days. No, not Morrison. He was just a guest. Then a pause. He's still here. The Duke never left. By early June, no one had seen Alan Sutter in over 2 weeks. The house stood quiet, windows dark, candles long melted into waxy puddles on the floorboards. Brandy filed a missing person report. Police entered the property on a Friday morning, accompanied by a locksmith. They found the front door unlocked. Inside, the house was untouched. No signs of struggle. No blood. But the study. The study was colder than the rest of the house by nearly 20 degrees. The cot was empty. The walls were still covered in Alan's scrawled phrases, but one new message had appeared, written in thick charcoal across the paneling above the fireplace. Gone right in. The leather chair had been turned to face the window, angled just slightly toward the bay as if someone had gotten up and left it that way. Alan's boots were found near the dock, just past the edge of the pier, faint impressions in the soft earth hoof prints. But there had been no horses on the property. Not in decades. Security footage showed nothing. Not a single frame after May 28th. Just static. And one final blip, a frame frozen at 3:11 a.m. It showed the outline of a man, broad shoulders, cowboy hat, a figure halfway turned, as if about to mount a horse just outside the frame. Behind him another man, Alan, smiling. The house has since been locked, listed as a historical curiosity. Locals don't go near it, but on quiet summer nights, just before dawn, some say they still hear it. The slow creak of saddle leather, the heavy sound of boots on wood, and the low murmur of a voice long gone, still lingering in the walls. Let's ride. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story.